Welcome to another segment of the MCR. My name's TJ. Please like, share, and subscribe. This past Monday, as in yesterday for me, this will probably air on Wednesday, so think 2 days ago. This past Monday, Jordan Peterson, the well-known psychologist out of Canada, interviewed a man by the name of Frederick Kagan, K-A-G-A-N. Frederick Kagan, he's a professor, and he has a PhD in Russian and Soviet military history. And Jordan Peterson basically wanted to interview him, wanted to talk to him, so that Jordan Peterson could better understand what the heck is going on over there with Russia and Ukraine. The interview lasted 1 hour and 43 minutes. You can see the interview on Jordan B. Peterson's YouTube channel. It's titled Russia, Ukraine, and the West. And he has it listed as podcast number 230. I'll confess I had to watch it twice. There were occasions that I had difficulty keeping up with, we'll say, their intellect. But I got to tell you, Professor Kagan answered some of the questions that I've been wondering about surrounding this Russia and Ukraine war. For example, why does Putin want Ukraine? And aside from the natural resources, and Ukraine's been known as a wheat producer back when the Soviet Union was in existence. But Professor Kagan basically says that it was his opinion, and this interview is where I'll cite as my source for what I'm going to say in this segment. But it was Kagan's opinion that Putin just has in his mind what should constitute proper Russia. And he kind of compared it to in World War II when Hitler annexed Austria and Czechoslovakia. Because, and using that as an example, Hitler had in his mind what would constitute the Third Reich. And Putin, likewise, in his mind, envisions Russia containing Ukraine. Professor Kagan mentions that in the 1990s, the Soviet Union basically fell apart in 1991. And in the 1990s, Russia struggled mightily, and in some regards, you could say they failed, transitioning from communism to capitalism. He doesn't necessarily feel it was Boris Yeltsin's fault. He felt Boris Yeltsin was just trying to keep the Communist Party at bay and wasn't able to give his full attention to the economy. Nevertheless, Putin comes along, and Putin is not happy with what transpired in Russia during the 1990s. Now, this is where Professor Kagan says something very interesting about Putin. I'm assuming Kagan knows what he's talking about, but he says, Professor Kagan, he doesn't necessarily suspect that Putin is a true believer in communism, but rather he uses communism as the mechanism to achieve his goals. And as I was listening and watching to the podcast, the word pragmatist came to mind, which had me thinking, is Putin a pragmatic communist? Because that's sure how Kagan made him look. And I found that very interesting. Professor Kagan cites two events in, we'll say, recent history. In 1991, Soviet Union disintegrated. In 1994, Ukraine gave back to Russia the Russian nukes that were within Ukraine. And then in 2014, there was the Minsk agreement, and the intention of, and let's go back to 1994 when Ukraine, at the behest of the U.S., gave Russia's nukes back to them. This all occurred with the full intent of Russia and the world recognizing Ukraine's borders. So, in this regard, Professor Kagan basically cites Russia as the bad guy here. Yes, there were issues to the east, and there was that disputed area, and the Minsk agreement was supposed to address that dispute. That failed. But as far as the rest of Ukraine, and as far as Russia invading from the north, Professor Kagan feels that Russia has totally violated what they've agreed to in the past. Professor Kagan, in Professor Kagan's talk with Jordan Peterson, Professor Kagan says, "Hey, I called it wrong. I didn't think they were going to invade Russia." And Jordan Peterson says, "Well, why? Why did you and others not think that Russia was not going to invade Ukraine?" And Professor Kagan cites that from a military perspective, these units were not prepared. And when he says they weren't prepared, this is in regards to command and control and resupply. He goes, yes, I was wrong in predicting that Russia wouldn't invade, but his reasons for why he didn't think they would invade is the reasons in which, at the time of this video, Russia has failed to take Kiev and other cities. In fact, the only city Russia's been able to occupy is, we'll say, in the southeastern area where disputes were already occurring, and near the Crimean border. And really, right now, they've only been able to achieve one city to the south. So, I guess I was, and I really enjoy studying history. So as I was listening to Professor Kagan talk with Jordan Peterson, I was very interested in some of the historical events leading up to this current war. Professor Kagan cites the banking system SWIFT, and I had never even really heard of this before until this war here. But I guess this SWIFT system is a means that banks communicate with each other internationally. Well, to include Switzerland, they've kicked Russia out of this SWIFT system, making it difficult for Russia to bank internationally. Whether or not some of these other sanctions has an effect remains yet to be seen, but it does appear the ruble is dropping. Professor Kagan cites a concern. Poland is probably the closest ally to Ukraine at this time. Poland shares a southern border with Ukraine. Both Poland and Ukraine share a border with a country, Belarus, and Poland and Ukraine also share a border with parts of Russia. So Poland is especially concerned as to what Russia's doing to Ukraine. Poland feels they could be next here. Here's where the concern develops. Poland, it may be Russia's opinion that Poland gives just too much aid to Ukraine. And whether it's Russia or Belarus, there could be attacks on Poland. Poland, being attacked, would be within their right to respond, and therein begins an escalation of events. And if Poland's attacked, then the West would need to come to the assistance of Poland, and I guess at the end of the day, therein lies the concern of nuclear escalation. Okay? Professor Kagan also cites that Russia could very well employ battle tactics in Ukraine that they used in Syria. And he cited a term, siege and starve. And also Russia is employing the use of cluster bombs. All countries have them. It's not outside the Geneva Convention, the use of them. But what cluster bombs are is basically they explode in the air and drop more bombs down onto people. It's intended to what we used to call in artillery saturate a grid square. Okay, and using them, military units upon other military units was deemed acceptable conduct within war. But to use cluster bombs on civilian populace is deemed unacceptable. Putin did do that in Syria. There are concerns he will do the same in Ukraine. So, and there was so much more discussed in that video. It's hard to touch on all the points. I would just really suggest to everyone, if you're interested at all as to what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, the history leading up to this war, who holds the moral high ground in this, I would really suggest you watch this video. And I'll say again here, the video was titled, well, it's on Jordan B. Peterson's YouTube channel, titled Russia, Ukraine, and the West, podcast number 230. I found it very informative, and I suppose some conspiracy theorists will poo-poo what Professor Kagan has said. That's fine. You know what? That's the beauty of a free society. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. Okay? So have at it for those who might disagree. I'm a big boy. And with that, I will end. As always, be safe. Watch your six. And don't tread on me.